never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. Bob Marley. Good little quote there. This video is all about how to get stronger weekly. I think everyone, when they first start lifting, as discussed in the last video, has some progress. The barrier to strength at the start is so low, and generally people will progress consistently. I think that duration of progression, like how long you can progress weekly, changes on an individual basis massively, depending on a lot of factors, like how good your training actually is. But what I wanted to discuss today is some of the factors that can lead to reliable progress. And I'm going to try and stay away from this conversation of intensity and effort, because that is something that's I've spoken about enough in the last couple of videos, and that is at the forefront of all of this. I'm going to talk more on the side of technically, and what to actually do on a day-to-day, on a session-by-session basis. First of all, you want to talk about quality. You want to think about quality. And what does that mean? As you see me struggling to get my setup here. This is a great exercise, but the setup still isn't perfect yet. But it's enjoyable, and the tricep gains have been fulfilling. So quality. What is quality? Quality is a very abstract concept, and I'm actually going to kind of just say quality is it's bullshit. You can't really define it. Good and bad isn't really a thing. It's more what derives certain outcomes. So what derives reliable strength outcomes in the gym? It's things like standardizing your form as much as possible to ensure you're actually progressing rather than just changing your technique. Now, this has been spoken on massively throughout the industry, and it's just super important. You want each rep to look as close as possible to the prior week's reps and next week's reps, and on a rep by rep basis in a set. So choose your standardized form and progress within that. Caveat, though, all of this comes secondary to intensity and intent. If as you see on like any of my exercises, my elbows might waver out a little bit on a tricep exercise, for example. The knee path might not be optimal for a certain aspect of my quad. That comes second to intensity, but your intention should be to keep that form and that technique as consistent as possible throughout all your exercises. That helps actually derive if we are getting change in strength rather than just change in technique. Secondly, and this I think is this is definitely up for discussion, absolutely, but I think lining up your body's strength profile of different tissues and the resistance profile of different machines or exercises, so that each aspect of a lift is challenging the tissues to the highest level throughout the range of motion. And you can do that on the prime machines that I've got at work, which are just phenomenal. But generally what this means is making the point where we've got the best leverage and where we can produce the most torque, making that the hardest, and the point where we can produce the least amount of force and have the worst leverage, making that the easiest part of the exercise. Now, generally, most exercises you see me doing will be set up like that, like this one in particular. It's hardest in that lengthened position and gets easier towards the top of this bicep curl. all the machine work, I'll have it biased towards that. And you can just be fortunate enough to have those machines or not. But I think this is big. I think having the resistance profile of a exercise match the strength profile of your body can challenge the tissues throughout. So I think when you're doing any exercise, a different part of a muscle will be challenged to a greater degree. So the muscle tissue is big. We always think about these different fibers. We just think of it as a pec or a bicep. But in reality, there's hundreds of different fibers in each muscle tissue, and each of those tissues will be recruited and stimulated at different points in an exercise. So if you can match up the exercise in order that different fibers are challenged to their optimal level, so they have that perfect amount of challenge throughout the exercise, then it's more likely that you will create a greater stimulus and cause greater adaptations over time. So, for example, this lat raise, I'm just warming it up. It's hardest in the lengthened position where we have the best leverage, where that tissue has the most amount of the highest ability to produce torque. And then it gets easier as I get higher up and the muscle gets shorter. So generally speaking, from my current understanding, when a tissue is lengthened, it has the best leverage. You can think of, it's very rare that the limiting factor on a bench press is right at the bottom. The sticking point is normally in the middle or towards the top. Same thing with any kind of horizontal row. The limiting factor is normally when the lats or the back tissues are maximally contracted or in that shortened position. You rarely see it. The only time you'll see someone fail in that lengthened position is when they've loaded up way too much, and they'll have no chance of even of getting further on in the rep. So it's just too much overall load. And trying to set your exercises up to match the resistance profile and the strength profile, for me, like I've only done this for about 6 months, I would say, because you need the equipment to do it, or you need to faff around figuring out different exercises for different tissues. Some are set up naturally for it, like the dumbbell bench press, which is why it's argued that gym bros have been able to develop good pecs and good triceps and good shoulders, because those pushing exercises are already set up. The traditional gym pushing exercises are set up to match the resistance profile of the exercise to the strength profile of the tissues. It's hardest in the lengthened position, and it's easiest towards the top, just because the moment arms changes, so the internal force required is most challenging when you're in the lengthened position. This is a bit oversimplified, because actually when you go down super deep, the moment arms get smaller than the midpoint, then a further up point, and the actual force required is less. So it's a little bit oversimplified, but it's better than, say, pull-ups, where pull-ups or lat pull-downs, the resistance is the same throughout. The moment arms don't change too much. Again, this is a little bit too oversimplified, but effectively, generally, chest exercises in your gym, your classics, your bench press, etc., are set up a little bit better with your resistance profile of the exercise to the strength profile of the human, whereas back exercises traditionally aren't. That's why a lot of people find it easier to develop their chest, their shoulders, their triceps, rather than their back. That's why in bodybuilding, a common thing that's heard is shows a one from the back, because the back is harder to develop. So I've only been setting up my exercises to match my strength profile to the resistance profile for about 6 months, but the gains have been spectacular. They've been really good. So just theoretically speaking, if you can match up those two things, the strength and the resistance profile of exercises, I think you'll challenge a muscle better across each rep, and therefore each rep yields out more and more of a stimulus, which I think leads to more reliable progress. Secondly, if you want to get stronger each week, we'll just talk about gym stuff today. I was thinking about going down the nutrition path, but we won't. Secondly, technique. You probably don't want to be changing exercises too often. I'd probably suggest keeping the same exercises in the routine for as long as possible until psychologically you get drained or your joints start to suffer, because there will be a skill and technique component, and you want that to have as small an influence as possible. You want to remove the skill and technique component. That's again why machines are generally more optimal for building muscle and strength, because you have less things to think about. The stability is higher. As Pat Davids talks about it, the ground is higher. More parts of your body are touching something that is harder to move. The likelihood of you falling over or your joints moving in a way you don't want to move is lower than free weights. As you can see there, it's a great example. So there are machines that can set your humerus fixed in place while doing a tricep extension versus a skull crusher. If I had the machine to fix my humerus in place, because you'll see it wavers around all the time. So there's a much higher skill component of this exercise than a tricep machine where I've got my humerus locked in place. However, you have to kind of meet the gym you're at and still try and find effective exercises for you, because you're not always going to have these best machines, super stable machines to drive the best hypertrophy stimulus. The next order of business is, once you've figured out the exercises, you've got your resistance profiles of your chosen exercises matching the strength profiles of the muscles. I've just said this very simply, but there is a lot more detail. I'm definitely not the person to dive into the deep biomechanics of how to set those things up, but that is something you will definitely want to consider when choosing an exercise. Once you've figured that out, high stability is your next port of call, probably even before, because the likelihood of being able to adjust the resistance profile is lower than actually just selecting exercises that have a higher level of ground or a higher level of stability. Effectively, just go on a machine rather than doing free weights. You'll probably yield a lot more out of it, unless the machine is terrible and significant. And again, that resistance profile doesn't match the strength profile, which is a lot of machines, unfortunately, because that will probably take away from your progress and your gains, because the tissues won't be lengthened optimally throughout their range of motion. So those two things are actually super important. The stability, yes, the ground of an exercise, as well as the resistance profile of that exercise. So those two things, when it comes to exercise selection for developing strength, are fundamental for getting reliable outcomes. Next, how much of that should you do? What's the quantity? Once you've found the exercise, you've matched up the resistance profile, etc., you've got high stability, high ground exercise, how much should you do? And that's an answer you should play around with. Generally, yes, 5 to 30 reps. The literature has showed that the outcomes haven't been too different between those two rep ranges. It could be 5 reps, it could be 30. However, you need to work within your base of experience and your preference. So for different exercises, you might prefer a higher rep range. Currently, I'm very biased towards this 6 to 10 rep range, 6 to 15, I should say. That's where most of my sets are. Most important thing are those are challenging sets, and you measure your quantity of work. This is the most important thing in this video, probably. How do you know you're doing enough work? The answer to that question will appear the following week. If you've done enough work, you'll be able to either do 1 extra rep or increase the weight by the smallest possible increment. If you can tick those 2 boxes, if you can either add a rep or add a bit more weight with the technique staying the same, exercise staying the same, you've done enough work. If you can't, then you need to ask questions about the work you did last week. Work harder, be more diligent with how close to failure you're getting, make sure it's a challenging set, make sure you get your mind right before the set, etc., etc. I judge the quality, the outcomes tell me if I've done the work. So how much to do? The answer is enough that drives performance in the following week. You're probably looking at 1 to 3 sets per exercise. 1 to 3 hard, good quality working sets per exercise in order to drive adaptations for that following week. You can't do no sets because you're not doing anything. 1 can be sufficient. 2 can be better. But it kind of depends on your feel, and that's your experience over time. The literature will say minimum of 4 working sets per body part per week to drive some adaptations. I think you should challenge that and see if you can do it with less, see if you need more, but start from that minimum effective dose of 1 good quality working set, and can you add weight the next week? It's more likely that you'll need at least 2 because there's room for error with just 1, and that room for error gets reduced with the second set. You can get used to an exercise and pushing that weight as you get into those later sets. How to get stronger weekly, a couple topics covered. This is a in-depth conversation, and there's a lot of things that can be discussed here. So just to qualify, I've been losing weight the last 8 weeks and still been adding strength, still been adding weight to my lifts or reps. So there is a lot of scientific literature out there that suggests you can't, there's a lot of even discussion that you can't make strength gains while losing weight. I want you to think for yourself and challenge whatever you've read or heard in the literature or on social media, etc., and figure it out by yourself. That's why you need to measure what you're doing each week and reliably reflect on that to see if you are actually deriving gains from the work that you're putting in. Anyway, I'm going to stop the video there. I've talked long enough. How to get stronger weekly. Hope you got some value from this video. Hopefully I've opened up a discussion that we can have. Hope you have a good day. Thanks for listening.